Hi and welcome to Jessie James Beads. I hope you're having a fabulous day today. For the video today, we're going to be working with a bead mix from the Magical Mystery Bead Box for June 2023, and we're going to work together to create a non-gender specific bracelet. So it can be worn by absolutely anyone, and I hope that you will enjoy making along with me today. Let's head down to the board and take a closer look. So this is just one of the bead mixes that you will have received in the June 2023 Magical Mystery Bead Box, and I've elected to work with 2 gauges of wire, 18 gauge and 20 gauge. Now I'm doing that in 2 different colours to make it easier to see how this chain bracelet comes together. In your Magical Mystery Bead Box you will have had paperclip chain in the gold colourway. I've got a little bit of silver that I wanted to use because again it helps to define which part is which when we're creating this piece together. So we're going to start with about 12 inches or so of that 18 gauge round wire. This is craft wire I'm working with today, and I'm just going to smooth that through, get it nice and toasty and trim those ends securely. Now to begin with, what we're going to do is thread on the 3 components from our bead mix, which is one of these gorgeous turquoise colour beads, this huge feature focal spinner disc, very cool texturing and low lights in an antique silvered finish, and then a second one of those gorgeous turquoise colour beads. There are many to choose from though, and that's just one of the bead mixes. So in order to preserve the centering on this section of wire, what I like to do is just put a temporary coil, just a little loop on either end, and this will stop your beads from flying off onto the floor or across the kitchen, wherever it is that you're working. So there we have those beads in place to begin with. And the reason that I don't close this up yet is because I want to decide how many times to wrap when we get cracking. So I've cut 2 lengths of the slightly lighter gauge wire, and I'm using a gold coloured craft wire in 20 gauge, and I very much want to make sure that that centre section is super toasty warm. I found the centre of my lighter gauge wire. I'm going to centralise that disc spinner in my length of the slightly heavier 18 gauge, and I'm going to start by just wrapping around one side of that disc bead, just chasing the shape like so that I'm creating a faux frame for that spinning disc. What I'm going to do now is to draw one side of the lighter gauge wire all the way around my core. So I'm using copper for the core and gold for the extra, and I'm going to wrap that a good 4 or 5 times nice and firmly around that slightly heavier wire. Now if you can use a harder wire for your core, all the better. If not, there are ways that we can make this work for us. We're just going to pinch up that coil. So I've got, I think, 4 wraps so far. I'd really like to have another one, so I'm going to bring that all the way around one more time. So I have 5 neat wraps around my copper core wire. I'm going to draw that spinning disc into the centre of the heavier wire, and because I'm right dominant, I'm just going to flip this upside down. So I'm going to just give that a bit of a push to make sure that it sits neatly. The key here is that you don't allow this golden 20 gauge wire to go either underneath or over the top of that spinning disc. We want that spinning disc to have a lovely circuit of wire going all the way around it. So I'm going to repeat what I did on the first side. You can use these beads just to push that coil up into position. If you grip quite firmly with your non-dominant hand, then as you rotate around that core wire, you shouldn't cause too many bends to occur. So we've got those 5 wraps on either side. I'm just going to tighten that up, and I'm just going to check to make sure that this hasn't come over the surface of that spinning bead. If it does in any way, what you can do is just rotate in the opposite direction of the coil, and you should be able to loosen that off enough to get your spinning disc bead back into position. So once that sits nice and tightly, and here's an example of why we put the coil or the little loop on the end, it's to stop that bead escaping. So I'm going to push the next bead down into position, and what we're going to do is draw the wire. It's currently sitting underneath the core wire, so it's rotated 5 times around the core, sitting underneath. Push that bead into position nice and firmly, and I'm going to draw the tail of wire all the way around so that it comes over the top, from underneath to over the top. So as long as you're going from one to the other, it doesn't really matter. That's looking nice and neat and tidy already. So I'm going to draw that all the way around that core wire one time until it disappears off exactly in the same direction that it came from. What we're going to do then is turn the whole thing upside down, and I'm going to bring this section of wire, give it a little bit of heat to warm it through. I'm going to bring it back around from where it is right now, which is on top of that core wire, to underneath. And I'm going to pinch that very, very firmly as I then wrap to fill that little gap in the middle as many times as I can neatly achieve. Now, we wrapped 5 times on the first try around, so I'm going to be able to wrap 4 times this time. So you can see that's looking nice and neat and tidy. If I flip the design over to the rear, what I'm going to do is truncate that section of wire really neatly. Now, this is a very useful, usable piece of wire. This goes into my scrap pot for later usage, and because it's 20 gauge, I can use this to make handmade earring findings. So never worry about having a little bit of scrap, you'll always find a use for it. What we're going to do is tidy that end section away neatly. Get it to sit down tidily on top of that little stack and push it inside the end of that round spinning disc. Then what I will do is repeat exactly the same thing on the other side. So where my finer gauge wire is on top of that core, I'm going to give that a smooth through and take it round to underneath, like so. Spin it around one time. This is what it looks like in the opposite direction. So it's gone from on top to underneath, spun around that core wire one time, and it's now underneath on this side. So if I turn that all the way around, it's coming from underneath to over the top. Let's see if I can avoid hitting the camera. So we're going to coil now 4 times to match what we did on the first side. Get that nice and neat and tidy. And we're going to draw that wire to the same side that we cut on the first half, trimming away, and again you have a useful residue of wire there. Always good for practicing with things if you don't want to use it as earring findings, and just tighten that coil up neatly. I have now a second 12-inch length of that 20 gauge round in copper with gold colour over the top, and I'm going to give that a little bit of smoothing warmth in the centre. And we're going to overlay that first section. So you can see here we've got the gold lighter colour wire going over the top, and the wire travels to what is currently the top of my design. So I'm going to just pinch very, very firmly and wrap on top of the multiple coils we've already created, with a section of the wire coming over to what looks like the right hand side. So if I draw that all the way around, I'm pretty sure we can get 4 wraps in there again. And this is the side I like to think of as the top, because you've got the frame for that spinning coin bead. So let's do the same thing, bring that all the way around over the top, chasing the shape of our spinning disc and getting that to sit neatly into position. Now you will want to hold this very, very firmly as you draw that tail around. And we're going to go again for 4 wraps to fill in that gap. Now I like to take the tails of wire to the underside of the design. And we're going to trim away. Again, we've got useful lengths of wire here to play with. Make sure that you trim the correct piece. It's always a little bit sad if you trim the wrong one. And then again, we're going to concentrate on tucking away that end as neatly as possible into the design. So I'm just pushing that down tidily. Flip this up the other way because it's easier for me. And again, tuck that tail as inside those coils as you possibly can. That's the crux of the design today, and what I'm going to do now is show you how to attach this into some chain. So we now have time to remove those end sections. If you're short on wire, what you can do is open these back out, but what I'm trying to do is be efficient with time today. So let's get that out of the way, and I'm going to show you just on one end now how to add in some chain to the design and make it nice and seamless. So what we'll do is we'll put a right angle bend on one side and a right angle bend on the other side, trying to keep these as symmetrically distanced as possible. And then we're going to create a circular form with those round nose pliers, Draw that all the way around. You can make that as large or as small as you like. Let's pop the piece of chain in. Having as few connections as possible will make your jewellery nice and strong. So what I would tend to do at this stage is add chain to both sides, and then I would do 2 rotations of wire around the core, get it nice and neat and tidy. And then I'll do 2 rotations at the other end, see how much space I've got left, and then I'll do a single rotation of that core wire on either side, and what can happen is that the whole thing will slide up and down. Let me show you. So that can move over to one side or it can move back into the centre. If you do 1 rotation of wire on the core either side of that round form, linking into your chain, then you will always end up with symmetrical jewellery. Now when I'm making jewellery that's non-gender specific or designed for gentlemen even, what I tend to do is avoid as many flourishes and coils as I have in my ladies' jewellery. So it's absolutely up to you what you do here, but if you want to keep things looking a little bit cleaner lined, a little bit less frilly, I tend to take the wire to the underside of the design. Let's trim that excess away. Make sure that end sits down really neat and close to the core. So let's give that a squish. There we go. Rotate those pliers around, and then when you've added in the chain on the other side, what I tend to do is just put a little bit of a bend in the whole design, like so. So that when you pop that, let's just put this one out of the way, when you pop that on the back of the wrist, it is a little bit more close fitting. So let me just pop it onto my wrist there. If you add that curve in, it sits much more neatly on the body. I've just handcrafted a quick J-hook, but you can use any clasp you desire. There's a lovely clasp in the monthly bead box for June, which is this little chap, which I've used on another project. So you could add one of those if you wanted to, or you could make your own. I hope that you've enjoyed this jewellery suitable for any gender, and I look forward to coming back with you again. My name is Jem, and this is Jessie James Beads.